Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our today's NAC online program, The Future of Digital Art, Current Trends and New Horizons. My name is Maria Mashcherska. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical, and musical performances. For more information about the National Arts Club, you can visit us at the National Arts Club or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. On behalf of our Art and Tech Committee, it is my absolute joy to welcome you to today's panel, featuring co-founder of ACE ComicCon and contemporary artist Gareb Shamus, manager of digital art sales at Christie, Sebastian Sanchez, and art historian and technologist Dr. Emily Spratt. Together, they will explore trends in the digital art scene, NFTs, and their impact on the industry, the importance of the community, and much more. Following the discussion will be a brief Q&A, so please feel free to use Q&A function for any questions you may have. And without further ado, let me turn it to our dear panelists, Emily, Gareb, Sebastian. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my name is Emily Spratt, and I'm a professor of art history and also do work on emerging technologies in the art tech space. I am so delighted to be here with you today with my very distinguished colleagues tonight. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I wanted to kick things off by sharing with you some of my thoughts about digital art today. So when we think about digital art, usually we go to a notion of 80s and 90s art that was largely kicked off by Harold Cohen. These were early adventures in AI, computer-assisted drawing with algorithms. When we think about AI and what AI is doing in the digital art sphere today, it's a whole nother level. And that is because we're really dealing with deep learning infused AI as really pioneered by Jan LeCun and others in their facilitation of the possibilities of what this tool can do for us. And so I'd like to sort of set some parameters up for tonight, which would be not to rely upon the expectations of digital art as they have been sort of turned into a classification of 80s and 90s art, but to really think about what is innovation that is happening right now in the art world, which is as a result of the influence of emerging technologies on art. And that includes this very different type of AI than the example that we saw from Harold Cohen's work with the computer scientists to create Aaron, but really to this new type of AI that is available to sort through, analyze, and even generate new information, textual and visual, about our data-laden world. So we live, of course, in a time of great excess of information, and the possibilities for what digital art can be now far exceed any definition that I would find operative for 80s and 90s art. Really, digital art today is in a whole new area. It's a whole new genre that needs to be explored upon its own terms, and that is in relation to these emerging technologies. So today we're going to be touching on blockchain technologies, the use of NFTs in the art world, and also AI-infused projects. Not Aaron, not Harold Cohen, but we're talking Rafik Anadel, Mario Klingemann. We're talking about NFTs such as those by Sam Spratt, no relation, by the way. And we are talking about the way that really a radically different digital information distraction-saturated environment is changing our expectations of what art can be, when art really, in this new possibilities of form, can take on the guise of anything from political commentary to reference to periods that came before, to something totally radically new. As we have this discussion, one thing I will just ask my panelists here to comment on when it becomes a right to do so is to just point out where we are in terms of this new definition of emerging technologies and fueled art, where we are now with that in terms of our codification of it as a new field altogether. And I'm sure you're already thinking about these new books that have come out saying that we're establishing a canon of NFT art. Where are we in terms of establishing this new emerging technologies produced art as a canon that already is becoming a very much a place of self-reflection within the art world, where you have NFT artists commenting on previous motifs and using a visual shared language of NFTs to really talk about how the next steps are going to be in this exciting space. All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to Gareb. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction to what we're going to be discussing today. My name is Gareb Shamus. I've been in the superhero business my entire life. Grew up collecting comic books, and then I became a really big collector. And then when I graduated college, I started a magazine about comic books called Wizard. And then it took off all over the world, decided to throw a party for our fans and called it ComicCon. And, 180 events later, 5 million tickets, and reaching hundreds of millions, up to billions of people around the world with this whole community around superheroes, has just been an extraordinary experience for me. And through that whole process, I've worked with literally thousands of artists and writers and video game developers and toy designers and, just almost everybody in the art world. And I've also been a big collector in that space as well. And, as you can see from behind me, these are two of my own paintings. So I'm also a fine artist myself. So, but that's been very traditional. And the whole world is changing now because of AI, and how that now is making what I call the creator economy. So when you look at what happened in social media, at first it was celebrities getting on social media, then we had social influencers being able to create content, and then they started creating products. And the next kind of wave that we're going to have is people being able to create their own content that they were not able to do, and they didn't have the skills to write or draw. But with AI and technology, they're going to be able to do that. So, whereas in the past, art was really subject to people that had a real talent or skill, or they were very creative. But now all of a sudden, you're going to start reaching people in a way that have an imagination and that might not have the technical skill to write or draw, but that could be made up for with programs, whether it's like Midjourney or ChatGPT, and believe me, there's literally hundreds more on the horizon that are coming out. So this is going to just transform the way people, view art, read art, and what I call, like in my world in particular, it's called sequential storytelling. So whether that's a comic book or animation or film or television or even this, Netflix series, that's all sequential stories. And right now it's been only produced by people that have resources. They have money, they have talent, they have access, they have distribution. And the way social media has democratized that whole world, the same thing is going to happen now in the art world in a way that we've never been able to see before. And it's really exciting because, now everybody's going to get to see what everybody else can create, but it's going to be very disruptive. So the people that are very well entrenched in that world are all of a sudden going to get upset, not in a in a negative way, but like they're going to get upset in that there's going to be so many other people that have access to the skills and talents that they once were only relegated to them.
I guess that leaves me. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian. I'm the manager of digital art sales at Christie's. So I was actually the first real hire for a new digital art department. So I was hired specifically to work on everything digital art. My role entails curation of auctions, working directly with artists, spearheading almost like product development on our Christie 3.0, which is our NFT website. I have a background in design, art, and tech. So my role is kind of a fusion of all of that. I went to Parsons Design School, studied design management. So I had a business degree from a design school, which is interesting, a lot of like managing creative projects. While I was in school, I interned at institutions like MoMA, Christie's, Artsy, the Rebel Collection, now the Rebel Museum in Miami. From there, I went and worked at a small company that worked directly with major artists like Rasheed Johnson, Cindy Sherman, Barbara Kruger to produce special collaborations with them. So translating their work into different mediums. Somewhere along the way, I was introduced to digital art in around 2017, 2018 by a good friend of mine. And it was actually like art made with creative coding, which is now known as generative art. Generative art is algorithmic art. It's made using algorithms and code, and it's now one of the sort of biggest market sectors in the digital art market. So I was exposed to it quite early before sort of NFTs were a thing, and I co-founded a gallery, one of the very early generative art galleries, and we were working with artists like Tyler Hobbs, who's now, again, one of the biggest artists in the space, and Dimitri Cherniak, who's also, a major artist in the space, and experimenting very early with digital, sort of like selling art digitally as NFTs, selling digital art as prints, printing it, printing out code to give to collectors. So really experimenting like what selling digital art looks like to sort of this new wave of collectors. I did that for a few years, which led me to my role at Christie's. And again, while at Christie's, I've done a bunch of auctions. I've only been there a year and a half, but I feel like, I've done a lot. I've spearheaded partnerships with Beeple, the artist, opening his museum in Charleston, with Gucci, doing like a fashion generative art fashion AI sale, with the Keith Haring Foundation, with UNICEF as a charity auction, and more recently with Tasha. And so along with they just published like the first major art historical surveys on NFTs, edited by Robert Alice, who's also an artist. So we did sort of a collaboration with Tasha and the artist as well. So again, my role sort of like does a lot of different things, but ultimately it's everything digital art passes my desk. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Gareb, I think maybe I give you a chance here to respond to some of those comments. I know that our earlier conversation, you had a few things to say about that.
Oh yeah, so it was very interesting. I have a friend. She's an elder artist and in her 70s and very successful. And I've been in her townhome, and it's literally wall to wall her art. It's just spectacular. And I was talking to her about AI and AI art. And I said to her if she has any interest in doing it. And she's like, no, absolutely not. Refused to even discuss it because she's such a traditional artist. And I said to her, okay, well then how about if I were to take all of your pieces of art that you've ever created and entered it into an AI, and then had AI come up with new art based on all your previous art. And I said, would you be interested in seeing what that looked like? And she said emphatically yes, without hesitation. So I think that, people that are very traditional artists, their initial instinct is to be allergic to technology and allergic to what could be done, using these new mediums, because it's so disruptive. But yet when you put it to people like that to see what the future could hold, and you appeal to artists, because everything we do, everything we talk about, everything we think about is our voice, and sharing our voice and what we think and what's happening out there in the world and what's happening to us, or sharing with other people. All of a sudden now we could do that in a different way. So by appealing to artists, with the way I appeal to them, it really touches upon, the heartstrings of like why they're in art to begin with, which is to push the boundaries of what they're capable of. And that's what AI can do. It's not going to replace her because people that want, that physical experience to know that she physically touched that piece to create it, that's one medium that will never go away for people that want that. But then there's going to be this whole opportunity for people that now can see where their art is going to go. And it was just so fascinating to hear her immediately change her tune after the way I presented it to her. So to me, that was really exciting. And, and it kind of made me think about, one of the things that Sebastian and we were talking about with digital art, with, how do you look at it? How do you want to collect it, right? So when you have, we were talking about Sam Spratt, like, whose art is gorgeous, and then you have somebody like DK and DK Motion. So Sebastian, how do you see that? Like, because that's something that somebody might normally look at as just a digital art that looks like almost a video game-ish in a way, like Donkey Kong in a way, but yet, it's still incredibly popular in digital.
Yeah, it's digital art so fascinating because it really takes, it's sort of the history of painting, the history of sculpture, the history of like text and publishing, and all these different histories combined. So naturally within that, like there's audiences for each. Like you could say DK is like a motion designer and an animator, which sort of has its own audience, and people with money in that audience collect his work, whereas Sam Spratt has more of like a painterly way of producing art. So you have like sort of like people who are like more like paint vibes focused, being interested in his, and a lot of times they cross over as well. So digital art is such a vast sort of, there's so many like subcategories within that. There's code-based art, there's like figuratism, there's like digital illustrations and paintings, and it's really just so vast, and it's such a rich creative ecosystem. So yeah, it's really exciting. And I would say like DK has a very strong following. So, and I would say they're probably like younger and sort of into like motion and animation and just understand that. So yeah, it's just really fascinating. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And also going back to your point about AI, so much of it is education, and so much of it is how you explain to people. When I was running a gallery in 2018 trying to sell code-based generative art, it was all about like, getting them to like see the art and be like, that's nice, and then being like, by the way, that was made with code, and then trying to like, really just softly like get them to understand it in a way that's approachable and not scary. Because I think, yeah, a lot of times, when people hear AI, it's, it's like what they see on the news, and it's not really, no one really knows what it means and the potentials. And I think so many artists, traditional artists, or like, I guess, artists who don't work in digital mediums could benefit so much by leveraging AI, from writing some of their, texts, writing some of their, descriptions about their artwork, to actually like potentially creating endless outcomes of like what their art could look like. I mean, again, like if you leverage it the right way, I think like it sort of opens up your possibilities times, 1,000. Whereas, and if you don't, that's fine too. But I think it's worth a shot, and keeping an open mind for artists. I mean, you could, I don't know if listeners here are familiar with the artist Laurie Simmons. She's a very well-known photographer. She's in countless museum collections. She's very well-known. She is dabbling in the AI space. She has like an AI collection where she, I think, either, sort of like remixed some of her photographs into like AI produced photos. So there's a lot of traditional artists, I think, working with it. Also David Sally, I know, is working with AI. So again, there's people into it, and I think there's some people who need a little bit of a push.
Well, one of the aspects that I love about the digital art is I think it introduced two elements that are harder to keep track of, and one is impossible in the traditional art world. One is provenance, right? So you can keep track of who owned that actual individual piece of art, throughout its history, because it's recorded on the blockchain, or if it's digital art that is, blockchain related. And then if it is on the blockchain, the idea of secondary royalty sales, right, which is a big issue. So if you think about how many other mediums, where artists get paid, after their initial release, whether it's a film or television show, or or music, where artists get royalties. In the traditional art world, artists don't get royalties on secondary sales. And, that's been a big issue. And if we can kind of crack that with the digital space, where artists, on the blockchain, they could do that if it's sold through the exchanges. But now all of a sudden, I kind of always make this joke that if Stan Lee was able to get a secondary royalty on every comic book that got sold, he'd probably be the richest person on earth, or he would have been the richest person on earth, because there had been so many billions of comic books that have been sold and resold every single year for 50, 60 years with his name on it. So, I mean, to me, that also creates this really exciting element, for artists to be compensated for it.
I just wanted to interject a couple of comments related to what's coming up in the chat here as well. Maybe you guys could weed out a little bit more about the issue of artistic authorship and how it is that we identify certain artists that are maybe familiar to the NFT art crowd, but might not necessarily be familiar to more traditional art lovers. How do we identify them? How can we find them? And how do we know who they are? How do we assign artistic authorship when so many hands are involved in any AI artwork? Of course, it's the case that artists are often not using the Midjourney or OpenAI to create their artworks, but are often coding themselves or tweaking pre-existing open source programs. So maybe you could just, both of you from Gareb, more your perspective as a creator, and Sebastian from the point of view of the art market. How do we deal with this idea of who actually is behind all of this, and how do we give proper credit beyond just tracking the provenance? How do we give proper credit to these artists, including the computer scientists behind it?
Yeah, it's been a big issue. So as we've seen, there have been some lawsuits created because basically the output is based upon the input. And when ChatGPT has started, they basically scraped everybody's material first, without asking or without permission. And that's caused a lot of controversy in the industry, for sure, because people that have a fairly distinct style was starting to come through in people that had no ability to create art. All of a sudden, they were definitely trafficking on other people's, copyrighted material. So that is an issue. And, the thing is that I think so many people were just unaware of how AI even worked to begin with, so they didn't understand what it was and how it was created and what was involved in the creation of it. And now all of a sudden, people are starting to get really smart with that. So as I mentioned, that woman who's the older artist, we use her own art as the library data to create the new art. That's really the people that are going to succeed the most in the AI space, are the people that can use their own data for the future creations. So when I create my own art, to create my new art, I'm using my own material and not other people's material. So I'm going to succeed more than other people will that don't have a history of data. But it's going to be very, very hard because, anybody that's very famous, you could have done it for years, go into art programs and say, hey, make this look like a Leonardo, make it use like the Mona Lisa, or use, a Van Gogh style, or, right. So, or use a Keith Haring style, right. So, or pointillism, like it's, you've been able to do that, but all of a sudden it's really stealing other people's work. So, the more original that you create, the more valuable your art is going to be in the future.
And just, of course, to point out that it's quite tricky when you're dealing with pre-trained algorithms, even if you're using your own data set of materials that you yourself as an artist have developed, that you're still dealing ultimately with what has been scraped from online sources, potentially without permission, and that's already embedded within the algorithm. But Sebastian, would you want to comment on this issue of artistic authorship here?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that is always top of mind. It's actually an issue that just happened this week within our little digital art space. So another auction house sold an artwork by this artist, Claire Silver, which is, I mean, I can actually share my screen. I think it could be helpful for the audience. I just pulled it up, 1 second. So you might see, okay. So our competitor auction house sold the Left painting by an artist, Claire Silver. She's a contemporary digital artist, very well known in the space. And someone in the community sort of called out that it was a reuse of like an old, I guess, Chinese or Asian artwork. And there was a lot of sort of back and forth and a lot of people like either going against it, but the artist, if you look on the blockchain at the original artwork and all the data, she gave credit to that artwork. And this is sort of, I mean, they're not exactly the same. It's obviously heavily inspired. It looks quite similar, but it's a very different, unique artwork. So, you know, the bird is different. If you look at the eyes, if you look at the way, you know, you don't even see the feet, the beak is different, the pose is different. So, you know, you could say it's sort of like inspired by, it's not an exact mimic, but there was just a lot of back and forth between the community of people who are, you know, fans of this artist and just digital art enthusiasts overall, discussing this. And I found it super fascinating because, you know, on one hand, it is quite similar and there's obviously a direct reference, but on the other hand, throughout art history, there's always, you know, artists pointing back to other artists and like using their work as inspiration. So I don't have an answer on like what's right or wrong. We sort of try to do our due diligence in making sure that like things are sort of like morally and ethically correct. It's a bit of a soft spot. There's no sort of like, you know, right or wrong. I mean, in terms of like legal, you know, we don't sell enough AI art to like really, you know, have to really be worried about this. And when we do, we sort of do our due diligence for those one lots. But I found this to be a very fascinating use case of something that happened sort of this week. So I hope that was helpful in terms of sharing.
That was great. It was good for us too to see. One of the things that I thought would also be interesting to talk about, you know, is the community side of it as well, because AI and digital art and just we're in a creator economy and a shared economy now. And one of the things that I'm going to be working on the blockchain as well for the future, you know, is on the community side. So my entire life has been producing magazine content and all kinds of digital content for online, creating content for the Comic-Cons, literally creating hundreds of panels times 180 events, you know, so you're talking about, you know, 10,000 panels that we've had to curate over the years. And it wasn't just the content then, it was also bringing everybody together to share in that. But a big part of that, you know, from my perspective is, you know, that it was in a lot of cases, it was back and forth, or us meaning one to many type of content and community where we were driving all of that. It wasn't until like we started getting very big into the cosplay world where all of a sudden the fans were starting to now contribute, creating costumes that they wore to the events, that they started also now engaging fans, and that became a whole art unto itself. But now with the blockchain, one of the things that I'm a project that I'm working on is the idea that we can do what we call like open source IP, open source content. So we're going to be creating original superhero characters that we let out to everybody in the community. And then all of a sudden, using AI tools, they can then create additional content using those characters. So they don't have to create something original. They could use ours, and now they're contributing to the story. And, you know, when you look at a big media company, whether it's a Disney or a Marvel or a DC, like a Warner Brothers or Star Wars, like any one of them, you're talking about handfuls of people creating content for hundreds of millions of people. And I like to think about, well, what would it be like if we had 5,000, 10,000, 50, 100,000 people creating content for all of their friends and anyone around the world. And what type of world or universe of characters could we create if the contributing people were not just a handful of people at the top, but the community creating for themselves? And so I find that to be fascinating in terms of what the possibilities are for this technology and for art. Because before, if I just said to a fan, hey, go write a Spider-Man story, they'd probably do a pretty good job writing Spider-Man because you know enough about the character. But if I said, go create a character, most people wouldn't know what to do or where to start. So if I give them a character and if I give them a world that's already begun and say, okay, now write stories, it's going to be a lot easier for somebody to do that. But then they don't really have the writing or art skills the way a professional would. So now what would they do? AI. And so now using AI, you have fans and amateurs that in the past would have no ability to contribute to something like that in the community. Now, all of a sudden can be major contributors because it goes back to what I was talking about with having an imagination, but now all of a sudden they're using these other characters and now appeals to this massive community of people. So this is like one of the, I think, one of the biggest areas of opportunity, you know, that the blockchain and digital art and especially AI is going to be able to contribute to people to be able to, to actually create and create community out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like the digital art space, its promise is that the world can, anyone around the world can log in at whatever point and contribute or participate or share, create, buy, sell at any given point in time. I'm just going to share my screen for another time because I think it's useful. Speaking of sort of, just a wider audience contributing to a project. There's this one artist named Jack Butcher, who's a very well-known artist in the digital art space. He came from a marketing background and has a company called Visualize Value, who has worked with a ton of brands. But he's now an artist and he does like a lot of commentary on the space in general. But he has this project called Opepen, where it's basically a canvas. He sort of has this this blank slate, and he invites artists, ranging from very high selling digital artists to, your emerging artists to work on this sort of canvas and reinterpret it in different ways. So as you can see, everything sort of has a similar structure, but each artist is able to interpret it in a different way. And then this is distributed to thousands and thousands of people who already own sort of these, the sort of blank canvas. And then, over time, there's like the blank canvases are replaced by these like artist creations. So it's a super fascinating project. I highly recommend checking it out, but it's a great example of sort of like this very wide distribution. I think there's like 16,000 pieces in this collection, and then each like 100 is reinterpreted by a different artist. So over time, they'll be released, and some are like very like hype artists, and others are, emerging artists that are discovered and then become, they get sort of this big platform to showcase their art here. So if you can imagine a community of 16,000 people who are actively engaged in this, it's just super cool. And like the interpretations are really, really fascinating. So I think in general, the promise of the blockchain and digital art is really, the number of people, if you have 100,000 people, which is like a fraction of people on this earth, to spend $1, like on one of your artworks, like that is life-changing money for so many people. So, and I've seen so many artists who, come from, very like not privileged backgrounds who, sell a few pieces of art to a larger audience of people for not a lot of money, and it changes their life. And it's just fascinating.
What I love about it too is that it's, if those people each did their own individual art, they wouldn't get any kind of community recognition, but because they're all working together, they all get recognized, and someone whose art you would never have discovered before, you see their style. So yeah, I love that you screen shared. I think some people in the chat were asking which artist that was, or at least the project.
It's the project is by the artist Jack Butcher. I'm happy to write it in the chat.
That was a perfect example of what we're talking about in terms of this idea that the community contributes to something that can create value for everyone. And we're going to start seeing a lot more of that now. And that's what happens in a lot of these emerging industries. People know that there's that expression that rising tides raises all boats. And, especially talking to a lot of the artists that are in the digital space, they don't feel like they're competitors with each other, because we're so far from where this is potentially going, that the more everybody's doing well, everybody's happy for one another. There weren't, when Beeple sold when he sold his art for so much money, it was a celebration. Yes, there was a little bit of jealousy, but it was more from traditional artists. But the digital artists were celebrating the fact that all of a sudden somebody recognized the value of that. And now the next phase of it is going to be this idea of how the community participates way beyond what any individual creator can do.
Sebastian, can I just ask you to respond to Gareb's comments about that in relation to the involvement of collectors? Because it's very much, it's absolutely, I agree with everything Gareb is saying about the role of community, the artistic community, but we are also seeing a very new type of engagement on the role of collectors. They want in on it too. They want to influence how it is that a particular image is created using AI at a moment in time, which is unique to them, and an auction can happen then at that moment, which then solidifies which retrieval point within the data C is retrieved for the AI generation to then later be minted as an NFT. And so there's this now push from collectors to be able to interact in a way that we haven't seen before. And that type of interaction happens not just at the point of purchase, but also in terms of the sort of the legacy of then these artworks, even if they are then sold, but that the original collector can still interact with where then their artworks would go. So can you maybe talk about that side a little bit?
Yeah, and you're really so spot on. I think it's a really important nuance for the digital art space. Collectors play such an important role for the artist's career, where in the traditional art space, galleries really foster artist careers. They place them in institutions, they get them out there, they sort of market them and, get them in front of the right people. That doesn't exist in the digital art space at all. There is no sort of intermediary of a gallery. If anything, there's like selling platforms like an auction house or a platform like a I don't know, an OpenSea or a Magic Eden, which are some open decentralized marketplaces. But to answer your question, collectors are ever more important. I mean, just for example, if anyone in the audience has been to MoMA last year in 2023, there was a big digital art installation in the lobby by this artist Rafiq Anadol, who works with AI. That placement in the lobby, and it was then acquired by the MoMA after the exhibition ended, was all through a collector. So the collector got in touch with MoMA, worked on, exhibiting the artwork, worked on like producing the screens and producing the actual show, and then also facilitating the donation to the museum. So we see that a lot in the space. Collectors are sort of the artists. It's kind of, some of them are known as patrons because they're really sort of like helping this artist. It's almost like the Renaissance period, like, the Medici family who was like working with artists to help support them. But we're sort of seeing that again, that intermediary is not really there to sort of like guide these artists. It's really like someone believes in them early, the artist's career takes off from a monetary value and from an artistic point of view. And then the collector really works with them and works with their audience or with their network to place the artworks, to exhibit the artworks. I mean, just going on another artist, Sam Spratt, which we touched upon earlier, his most recent artwork was acquired by this great institution called One of One, which is a sort of like fund that collects artworks. But they're producing an entire exhibition in Venice during the Biennale to exhibit this artwork so that people can see it. It's owned by a private collection, and it's a private collector's artwork, but they are spending, I don't know, probably tens of thousands of dollars to show this to a broader audience so that people can engage with it, people can understand it, and probably after that, some sort of institutional acquisition to a museum. So yeah, like usually the galleries would do that, but now it's collectors that are doing that, which is really interesting.
It's really fascinating that a space that does not necessarily require the tried and true institutions that have often been the arbiters of taste throughout time, that it's not necessary to have that in the digital art space. Yet here we have digital artists often wanting to then sort of reestablish that, especially with Biennale. Yeah. So Gareb, I just want to give you a chance to respond to all of that.
To me, it's just, it's really exciting to see what people are capable of using this as a new medium, right? So up until very, very recently, digital artists weren't really considered artists, even though, they were involved in creating so many digital assets for other projects. But for the first time now, in very recent years, these digital artists now are starting to get recognized as artists. And I think it's very scary to the establishment because it's a whole new form of art that's gaining a lot of traction as a legitimate form of art. And Sebastian could add to this after about the value, right? That these works actually have a legitimate value to them, which is also the part that reinforces the legitimacy of it. And you have a lot of traditional artists that are really either, it's weird for me to say it, but they're actually upset that digital art is connecting because they think of it as competitors when everybody has as much access to it as everybody else. And I'm not a digital artist, but yet, and it has nothing to do with the kind of art that I create, but yet I love it and I collect it myself and I appreciate it. And it doesn't take away anything from me because somebody that's interested in purchasing a digital art is not going to all of a sudden want one of my physical pieces. Just like if somebody wants a physical piece, they're not going to want a digital piece, right? So, so to me, you have so many traditional artists that could benefit from entering this new medium, and they're just kind of backing away off of it. It's almost like they're doubling down against it, when they should be embracing it. And to me, as I think all artists should be appreciating all other forms of art. And it really is gaining a lot of traction. I have a lot of friends that are very, very big digital art collectors, and I would love to have some of their pieces in my home, right? But up until a few years ago, I would have said to myself, well, how would I even hang it? But there's screens that you could put in your home that are the size of televisions or way bigger than televisions, where you could display this and you could have it on a loop and keep showing it. But it does have a legitimate value to it. And Sebastian could speak a lot more to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the market is, it's a very active market. I mean, you could read, I don't know, Rolling Stone or some other funny magazines that have no business reporting on the art market. In December wrote like NFTs are dead, like 99% of NFTs have lost their value. But if you look at that, I mean, you could argue that like 99% of every art made in the world has, zero value. But if you look at that 1%, there's really a very thriving art market, digital art market happening. I mean, just last week, there was a $16 million sale just open on the decentralized marketplace of a CryptoPunk. 1 out of 10,000 CryptoPunks was sold for $16 million. And these sales sort of happen left and right. And there's not enough people looking at them. I mean, again, I work at Christie's auction house, which is the art market. My department sits on the next to everyone handling the evening and day sales, and very traditional. Like, we work technically under the same team. Even internally, there's friction. There's a lot of education involved. There's a lot of I think a lot of people think of NFTs as the bubble that happened in 2021, and digital art as just like this bubble that burst, and now it's sort of all dead. But in reality, like, there's so much more to it. And as Gareb said, I mean, it's really gaining a lot of traction. I mean, from an audience that is new to collecting, and that's even more exciting because, you could say the art world is sort of like this closed thing that functions in and of itself in itself. Digital art opens that up to everyone. And that is very scary to that little bubble that's been sort of working for the past 100 years. So I find it super exciting. And, our job as Christie's is to, work with these traditional teams in our company to place these artworks and elevate the status of digital art and show the traditional art world and collectors that, you know, it's just another form of contemporary art. It's not something separate. It does function, the market functions a bit like different. It works super fast. It's tied to tech and social media and community building, which doesn't really exist in the traditional art world. But ultimately, the final thing is art. And a lot of these artists are well referenced. They know art history. They know what came before them. They're using that in their work. And that's what art is. I mean, if you look at art history, that's literally what it is. So yeah, again, you know, we're trying our best to educate internally, which I think is huge. And then of course, externally, which would go out to, you know, the collectors.
I think we've reached that point in the conversation that we can open things up for some questions from the audience. We've been answering, we've hit on some of the answers to the questions already there. So please share your questions here, and we can certainly take a few of them, if you will. While people are typing away, I will just mention that actually just over the weekend, I was at a concert and saw a visual of Manet's painting of Olympia, which then had her head lobbed off and was replaced by Pepe the Frog. And so I thought, if that isn't then a commentary on a commentary on a commentary.
Sounds amazing.
What is, yeah.
Or horrible, but amazing at the same time.
It's rather devastating, especially for Olympia.
I think one of the questions was, I think I saw it in the chat, or something we touched upon, which I just want to really highlight, is how do you like display NFTs? Is it a screen? Is it a print? I mean, this piece right behind me is an NFT that I own in my digital wallet. It's also a JPEG. It's an image file that I could then print on paper and send to a printer, get that print signed by the artist and framed. So it's not as inaccessible to live with digital art as you think. Obviously, you know, some of the tech stuff is complicated, but ultimately, if you own an image, you can print that image and you can work with the artist to get it signed. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, a lot of people are getting, you know, what you would consider to be a TV, but they're just monitors. And Samsung makes them, and they make them in any size you want. And I've seen them, you know, as big as 7-8 feet, you know, diagonally. So people are hanging some very large digital pieces in their homes, and it's just beautiful to watch.
And someone asked, care to define blockchain? Also, how do you own a piece of digital art other than a print? That NFT, I suppose, I don't understand. So the blockchain is basically the way in which digital art is bought and sold, you know, throughout, like how an artist creates an artwork and how then it gets transferred to a collector. That's what the blockchain helps do. That's what an NFT is. An NFT is sort of like a bubble where like an image file or a movie file lives, and that can move around a digital ecosystem. So it can start with the artist, and then you have the provenance on the blockchain that shows that the artist themselves made that, and then that file then moves as an NFT on the blockchain to the collector, and that is recorded on the blockchain, and it says now Sebastian owns that artwork. It's a little complicated at first, but if you like really, you know, if you just sort of immerse yourself in it, it's very easy to understand. It's just a capsule in which digital art can move around an ecosystem, and it's the way things are traded and bought and sold in the digital art space. It requires a digital wallet, which is sort of like that requires a little bit of learning, but that's what it is generally.
Yeah, the way I like to think of it is almost like an Excel spreadsheet in space, and it just keeps track of everything going from one to the next. So imagine every time you buy and sell that piece of art, it gets recorded on a spreadsheet somewhere, and you could just go back in time, however far, and see on the spreadsheet who owned it at any one point in time.
Sort of starting to wrap things up now. I was wondering if you both could maybe share some resources as to where people can look for commentaries on artists, how they can get involved with community. What would be some good starting points that you would recommend?
I would say, I mean, not to, shill sort of my own role, but I do think at Christie's, we really try to elevate the status of digital art is sort of like our tagline in our department. So we do a really thoughtful job in like curating and selecting artists who we think are promising and, really doing interesting things. So I would definitely recommend checking out our Christie's 3.0 website, which is sort of like, it's built on the blockchain, it's built on Ethereum, and we've built it bespoke for this sort of new way of buying and selling digital art. So we try to do a lot of content and educational. There's a lot of like articles that, you can read that like give you primers on digital art and the blockchain, and then just have fun exploring the art. I mean, we've sold like 3D files, we've sold movies, we've sold like code-based art that's like that lives in the browser. We've sold a bunch of different stuff, and we're always trying to test new ways to sell things. So I would that's a great starting point. And then in terms of the community, it really all lives on X or Twitter. All the commentary, it's sort of you have to maybe start by following some of the artists we, said in this chat, DK, Sam Spratt, follow those people. And then from there, you'll start, some other things will pop up. And I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, those are the best resources, absolutely. And then if you want to check out like OpenSea, which is where people buy and sell NFTs mostly, they'll have daily charts on what's selling and what people are into. Those are more like NFT collections versus digital art, but they do have art on there, which is worth checking out. Absolutely.
And I would just say about that too, if you're interested in becoming a collector, if you aren't already, that art is all about taste. And so buy what you love, find your passion that way. That's the most important thing, rather than just always looking at what the canon is telling you to do, or how the canon is actually being established right now with emerging technologies in art. Just stick to what your own taste is. That's usually the advice that I give. Gareb or Sebastian, do you have any last comments? Where I think we have come to time.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think it's such a new world, and we're right at the cusp of the beginning of it. So even though we're seeing it a lot in the media, we're so in its infancy of where it is and where it's going that you haven't lost any time by just getting started. I think it's really great to start reading about it and start Googling it like crazy and see what people are doing, and really immerse yourself, because it's going to be so disruptive in every single industry and every single business that it's going to be so groundbreaking that it's going to affect you in some way, whether it's you're in the art world or in the traditional world. I'm just finding myself more and more going to a lot of these AI sites for information, or making certain things that I used to do that took me a lot of time to just take it a lot less time to do. And I think it's just, don't think it's another one of these fads that's going to come and go. It's coming, it's here, and it's going to be accelerating faster than you can keep up with it, which is the scary part about it, which is why it's so much more important to understand it as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and I'll say, we're still early. Like as Gareb said, there's such a long future ahead. This is literally just the beginning of digital assets and digital art in a way that people can own in a new way. And yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. So, and also everyone on this panel at one point wasn't as involved in digital art and probably wasn't immersed in how we all have different backgrounds, but we were, it's accessible to everyone, and it's open. It's the internet. So you can learn and you can discover and you can collect for not a lot of money, and it's very accessible if you look in the right places. So I highly recommend trying to, dive deep into it.
Well, thank you, Gareb. Thank you, Sebastian, so very much. Thank you to the National Arts Club, but most of all, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and for your wonderful questions. And of course, this was only the beginning of a conversation, so apologies if we didn't get to your question. We hope to engage with you in some other way at a later point, but thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.